Lurking in the world's seas and oceans are Russia's shadow fleet ships, often aging oil tankers that are well past their expiry dates. The creaking shadow fleet vessels have become a lifeline for Russia as it continues a war against Ukraine that is bringing the country close to the edge of financial ruin. The shadow fleet money has to keep rolling in. Ukraine knows it must stop the fleet. Using some of the most innovative weapons in its arsenal, Ukraine has taken the fight to Vladimir Putin's not-so-secret ships. Putin is in big trouble. Ukraine just obliterated two of the key vessels in Russia's shadow fleet, and it will have its sights set on more. That's according to an unnamed source who spoke to the Kyiv Independent on November 29th. The outlet claims the source to be part of the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, and he tells the Kyiv Independent that Ukraine deployed some of its Sea Baby naval drones to the Black Sea coast of Turkey. There, the drones scored direct hits on a pair of Shadow Fleet tankers that the SBU source claims can transport up to $70 million worth of oil between them. Neither was carrying oil at the time. Ukraine timed its double strike to scuttle both ships without causing an environmental disaster in the Black Sea. The source adds that the SBU worked alongside the Ukrainian Navy to pull off its strike, adding that the Sea Baby drones successfully completed their work on the ships, and that they had dealt a significant blow to Russian oil transportation. Perhaps all of this sounds a little sketchy. There's no official confirmation from Ukraine that the strike has taken place, and the Kyiv Independent source has remained anonymous. There are reasons for both of these potential red flags. Ukraine frequently refuses to take credit for strikes conducted against Russian assets in territory other than Ukraine or Russia. Both of the struck ships were operating off the coast of Turkey, the Kyiv Independent claims. And Ukraine doesn't want to spark an international incident with a country that has served itself up as a mediator in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine several times. Furthermore, Ukraine may not want to claim credit for the strike for the simple reason that it doesn't want Russia to know how it was done. An SBU source claiming that Sea Baby drones were used is one thing, but an official post from the SBU detailing how it knew where Russia's shady ships were could offer hints to Putin's cronies that may make it more difficult for Ukraine to conduct similar strikes in the future. So the lack of official confirmation isn't surprising. Still, it would be nice to know that these Sea Baby strikes happen and that they're not all bluster from an unnamed SBU source. If the footage provided by the unnamed source to the Kyiv Independent is anything to go by, bluster is the last thing the source is creating. In a 92-second video, the SBU source proves that Ukraine's drones did exactly what they claimed to do. The video doesn't hang around, as it begins with footage being shot from the hull of a Sea Baby drone as it weaves its way toward one of the massive tankers that Ukraine claims to have destroyed. The drone pulls up just behind the tanker and arcs right, heading toward the ship's stern. Then the footage cuts from that being shot by the Sea Baby to video filmed a short way from the tanker. In full color, we see a massive explosion as the Sea Baby scores a direct hit. Flames and black smoke engulf the rear of the Shadow Fleet ship, with multiple angles of the fire being provided. Presumably, this means Ukraine had reconnaissance drones and other vessels sailing in the waters near the shady Russian ship. Again, there's no official confirmation, but the flames and the smoke speak for themselves. The rest of the footage offers up much of the same, with another Sea Baby heading toward another tanker. There is a massive explosion caught from several angles, and yet another of Putin's Shadow Fleet ships is taken out. If this isn't real, then the SBU has done a very good job of faking the hit. But the reality seems to be that the SBU source is telling the truth. Crucial hits were scored, and a pair of tankers were destroyed. Follow-up reports have also revealed more information about the two ships that Ukraine hit. In a November 28th article, Bloomberg reported that Ukraine managed to hit the Kairos and the Virat, both of which are oil tankers. The Kairos is around 274 meters or 900 feet long, and began taking on water as soon as Ukraine's Sea Baby struck, the outlet claims. The Virat, which was sailing close to Turkey's Black Sea coastline, was struck at practically the same time and began billowing smoke. A second vessel was also the victim of a second attack by Ukraine, this one occurring on November 29th, which suggests that Ukraine wasn't happy with the damage it inflicted the first time around. It wanted to ensure that the Virat would never sail again. Neither ship was unknown. Despite Putin's best efforts to keep his Shadow Fleet off the radar, the Kairos and Virat were both on lists of sanctioned Shadow Fleet ships. The former had been sanctioned by the UK and the European Union, with the latter also being sanctioned by the EU along with the US. It appears that Ukraine is being smart about its Shadow Fleet strikes. Rather than targeting vessels that it believes are part of Putin's fleet, it waits for sanctions to be implemented. Once they are, and Russia proves that it's still going to use the sanctioned ship, Ukraine unleashes the Sea Baby drones. Yet more information comes from NBC News in its report on the Ukrainian strike. NBC says the Kairos was returning from Egypt when Ukraine hit it, suggesting the tanker had already unloaded its cargo and was heading back to Russia for a refill. Other networks, however, report that the vessel was returning from India, not Egypt. All of the crew were evacuated via rescue boats, according to these outlets. Ukraine managed to pull off this strike without harming people who may not be directly involved in Russia's war. Still, Ukraine could argue that anyone who chooses to sail on a known Shadow Fleet ship does so at their own risk. As for the Virat, it was located further east in the Black Sea than the Kairos and was about 35 nautical miles off the shore of Turkey. The crew survived that attack, claims the Turkish Transport Ministry, which has provided much of the follow-up information about the strike. As for the Virat itself, the ministry would only say that the vessel is stable, suggesting that Ukraine may not have done enough to remove it from the world's water forever. But perhaps destroying the ships wasn't Ukraine's primary goal. Instead, it may have wanted to send a message to Putin. Ukraine can hit your Shadow Fleet at any time, and none of your ships are safe. In fact, this is far from the first time that Ukraine has taken on Russia's Shadow Fleet well outside its own domain. Bloomberg says as much in its report on the Sea Baby strikes, stating, "It isn't the first time ships linked to Moscow have suffered explosions this year. A spate of blasts in early 2025 hit merchant ships with a history of calling at Russian ports." In an article for the Kyiv Post, Chuck Farrar said that the first half of 2025 had seen Ukraine carry out several of what he dubbed surgical strikes that destroyed Russian Shadow Fleet ships. These audacious attacks took place in several bodies of water, including the Black Sea, in which Ukraine just struck again, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Baltic Sea. Typically, the strikes have been conducted by Ukraine's naval drones. However, there are some instances of suspected sabotage by Ukrainian agents operating in ports where Russia's Shadow Fleet ships regularly dock. Another message to Putin. Ukraine has more than one way to take out a Shadow Fleet ship. The one black mark against Ukraine, and perhaps the reason why nobody outside of an anonymous SBU source has taken credit for the latest strikes, is that Ukraine's Sea Baby drones aren't operating in Russian or Ukrainian waters. Both of the vessels that Ukraine just hit appear to have been in or close to Turkish waters, and that has naturally led to a response from Turkey. These incidents, which occurred within Turkey's exclusive economic zone in the Black Sea, have posed serious risks to the safety of navigation, life, property, and the environment in the region, Turkey's foreign ministry said following the attacks. "We are maintaining our contacts with the relevant parties to prevent the spread and further escalation of the war across the Black Sea, and to avoid any negative impact on Turkey's economic interests and activities in the region," the ministry added. That's good news for Ukraine. It means that Turkey isn't looking to punish Ukraine for what it just pulled off, even if it condemns the strikes for the danger it says they created in the Black Sea. Ukraine won't want to anger Turkey too much, as the country maintains a somewhat unique position when it comes to the Ukraine war. The London School of Economics and Political Science says that Turkey has shown an adaptive opportunist form of diplomacy toward Russia for much of its recent history. That opportunism has allowed the country to maintain a trade relationship with Russia. The Turkish Minute says that the country is now Russia's second largest trading partner, with total trade between the two countries amounting to $52.6 billion in 2024. Conversely, Turkey is a NATO member, and it closed off both the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits to military ships within days of Putin launching his Ukraine invasion. Those straits being closed has prevented Putin from replenishing the Black Sea fleet that has taken a beating from Ukraine's drones and missiles throughout Putin's invasion. So Turkey retains an interesting position in the war. It's somewhat neutral, certainly more than NATO's other members, but it still trades with Russia. Ukraine has to be careful because angering Turkey could lead to it opening up the closed straits to more ships that could turn the Black Sea into a total war zone. Thankfully for Ukraine, Turkey shows no signs of doing that. A slap on the wrist is all that is delivered to Ukraine for its daring Sea Baby strikes against Russia's Shadow Fleet. Speaking of the Sea Baby, they are the drones that did all of the damage to the Kairos and Virat, both of which were sailing under the Gambian flag in clear attempts to hide their true ownership. These marine drones have become infamous during the Ukraine war for the scale of damage they've done to the Black Sea fleet, and Ukraine keeps tweaking them to make them more dangerous than ever before. The Defense Post reported on the latest evolutions of the Sea Baby as recently as October 2025, suggesting that the drone has gone from a good concept in the early stages of execution to a fully mature weapon that Ukraine has in large quantities and can unleash on any of Russia's ships. The outlet reported on the Black Sea trials conducted by the SBU that revealed two new weaponized versions of the Sea Baby. One has a gyro-stabilized machine gun that can automatically track and identify targets. Presumably, this drone will be useful for patrolling the Black Sea and firing on any small vessels and aerial projectiles that Russia tries to send Ukraine's way. The second version of the Sea Baby is equipped with a multiple-launch rocket system that can rattle off up to 10 grad munitions. Neither appears to be the type of Sea Baby Ukraine used on November 28th and 29th. The older and reliable kamikaze variants of the Sea Baby were good enough to do the job. Still, these weaponized versions of the Sea Baby have received other upgrades that may have made the kamikaze version of the drone more effective. Both can travel up to 1,500 kilometers or just over 930 miles. Plus, they can carry payloads weighing up to 2,000 kilograms, which is just a touch more than 4,400 pounds. Add reinforced engines and new navigation suites, and you get a waterborne drone that packs a huge punch while also being able to reach almost any part of the Black Sea. Russia just found out that the Sea Baby is all grown up. Two of its Shadow Fleet ships have felt the power that these drones pack. However, you may be wondering why Ukraine chose to target Shadow Fleet ships rather than Russian military ships with its Sea Baby strike. There are a few reasons, with perhaps the most interesting being the Black Sea Fleet has been heavily degraded and pushed away from Crimea. Earlier in the war, it was believed that the Black Sea Fleet would be a difference maker. Back in March 2017, the Center for International Maritime Security said, the Black Sea Fleet contained 45 warships and 7 submarines, most of which were stationed out of the Crimean port of Sevastopol. Given that Ukraine barely has a navy outside of a handful of patrol and mine warfare vessels, that Black Sea force was supposed to be enough to grant Russia complete naval dominance over Ukraine. It wasn't. By the middle of 2024, Ukraine had destroyed a third of the Black Sea Fleet using missiles and drones, leading the rest of the fleet to withdraw from Crimea. The fleet became a non-factor, and that meant Ukraine could start using its Sea Baby drones to hit other targets. That's what we've seen with the attacks on the Shadow Fleet throughout 2025. If the Black Sea Fleet were still active, it would be a priority. The fleet isn't really active anymore, so Ukraine can take out other Russian ships that dare to sail in the Black Sea. The Kairos and Virat were 2 of those ships. Both have paid the price for being part of Putin's Shadow Fleet. That brings us to the second reason that these 2 ships were targeted, which is that Ukraine is now trying to chip away at what may be the most important moneymaker that Putin has at his disposal. With sanctions weighing down on the Russian energy industry, which is one of the country's largest revenue drivers, Putin has amassed a shady fleet of ships that fly under other countries' flags and try to sail under the radar, all to deliver oil and other cargo to the decreasing list of countries that still buy from Russia. The Shadow Fleet has been successful in part because Russia has invested $14 billion in building it up. That's according to Ukrainian Shipping Magazine, which says that the growing Shadow Fleet accounted for 60% of all crude oil tankers being loaded at the Russian Baltic terminals during the second half of 2024. The percentage dropped to 40% by the end of March 2025, but that was only due to an increase in loadings being conducted by major oil carriers. Putin's multi-billion-dollar investment into the Shadow Fleet has paid dividends, though how high those dividends are is a matter for debate. In August, the Economics Observatory claimed that Russia generated $235 billion in revenue from oil and gas sales, all of which was taxed to deliver billions of dollars into Putin's war chest. However, the outlet adds, the Shadow Fleet is responsible for $10 billion in extra earnings from Russian crude between December 2022 and August 2025, suggesting that the fleet isn't as important as it would appear. However, the European Parliament points out the Shadow Fleet has allowed Russia to charge $10 more per barrel of crude oil than it would have been able to charge otherwise due to Western sanctions. That's where the fleet's importance comes into play. It's all about scraping together a few extra $1 billion that Russia wouldn't have had otherwise. And all of this assumes that the European Parliament's and the Economic Observatory's figures are accurate. The very nature of the Shadow Fleet means that any dollar figures provided are estimates at best. After all, how can a concrete figure be reported when these ships are traveling and selling oil as secretly as possible? Ukraine won't care about the exact numbers. All it cares about is that the Shadow Fleet generates money for Putin's Ukraine invasion. The 2 ships attacked, with Sea Baby drones, were capable of carrying a combined total of $70 million worth of oil, and they likely made several trips per year. Costing Putin those ships could also mean that Russia is out of several hundred millions of dollars in oil revenue. It's a death by 1,000 cuts approach that works 2 ways. Either Russia permanently loses ships that generate money, or it has to spend money to replace those ships. Putin loses out in both scenarios, with each past and future attack on the Shadow Fleet bleeding Russia's finances just that little bit more. And that brings us to the third reason why Ukraine just took out 2 Shadow Fleet ships. The crude oil that they transport has become Putin's Ukraine war lifeline. The Centre for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, said the same in September when reporting on Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil refining. When combined with attacks on oil loading facilities, pipelines, and shadow fleet ships, these types of focused attacks are designed to take out Russia's money-making facilities, to leave Putin strapped for the cash he needs to continue his brutal invasion. If the campaign continues and brings more success, the consequences will force the Kremlin to sustain its military campaign while facing public dissatisfaction at home, CEPA states. By striking oil infrastructure, Ukraine has achieved dual goals: disrupting Russia's military logistics while undermining domestic stability. The latter is an underappreciated point, especially when it comes to disrupting Russia's crude oil sales. Taking out refineries, which produces products like gasoline, has an obvious domestic effect, as it leads to shortages at gas stations. However, preventing Russia from selling crude oil cuts into the Kremlin's budget. With Putin so focused on the Ukraine war, arguably to the detriment of the rest of Russia, less money from crude means less money being spent on social programs and other initiatives that keep a domestic population happy. Does that mean attacking the shadow fleet will lead to everyday Russians rising up against their leader? It's unlikely. Still, the more dissatisfaction that Ukraine can cause inside Russia, the greater the pressure placed on Putin to end the war sooner rather than later. These kinds of strikes combine that dissatisfaction with the sorts of financial hits that Russia is in no place to absorb right now. Ukraine is grinding Russia's economy to the brink as prices skyrocket, entire industries reach the verge of collapse, and an entire nation gets stretched to the breaking point. Putin's war in Ukraine has backfired hard, and Russia's economic spine is breaking because of it. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest successful strikes against Russia's shadow fleet assets. And thank you for watching.